The termination letter felt like ice. Across the polished mahogany desk, Marcus Thorne, our new CEO, smirked. He was all sharp suit and sharper smile, a vulture in a corner office I helped design. "Arthur," he said, the pity in his voice a calculated insult. "Meridian Dynamics is moving forward. We're streamlining, trimming the fat. Your role has become redundant." Redundant. Me. The engineer who sketched this company's first engine on a cocktail napkin 30 years ago. I poured my soul into these walls. I built this ship from the keel up. And this boy, this new captain, who just stepped aboard, was telling me I was the first piece of cargo he was throwing overboard. He had no idea who he was sinking. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just nodded, my silence a blade he was too dull to feel. I gathered the few personal items from the desk that had been my second home for 3 decades. A photo of my late wife, a worn copy of a propulsion textbook, my first patent. Walking past the mission control mock-up, I saw my signature on the original blueprint, framed like a relic. Elena, my top engineer, a brilliant mind I'd mentored since she was an intern, caught my eye. Her expression was a mix of shock and fury. "Arthur, this is insane," she whispered as I passed her workstation, her voice tight. I placed a calming hand on her shoulder. "He's the captain now, Elena. He gets to choose the course." My voice was steady, a mask for the storm inside. By the time I reached the elevator, the ice in my veins had begun to burn. Thorne thought he was trimming fat. He had no idea he'd just severed the ship's spine. A ship with a broken spine doesn't just sink. It shatters. And I knew exactly where to place the charges. My home office is more of a workshop, smelling of solder and old paper. The patent I'd grabbed from my desk, number 4, 815, 162, felt heavy in my hand. It was for the ion thruster that started it all. Meridian Dynamics wasn't born in a boardroom. It was born right here, in this garage, between a rusty lawnmower and a stack of old science fiction paperbacks. It was just me and David Chen back then. 30 years ago, we were 2 kids with an impossible idea. He was the charismatic business mind, the one who could sell ice in a blizzard. I was the quiet engineer who made sure the ice was real. We funded this company with second mortgages and credit card debt. I remember the night we secured our first seed funding. My wife, Sarah, brought cheap champagne out to the garage. Her eyes shone brighter than any star I was trying to reach. "You did it, Arthur," she'd said, her hand on my arm. "You're going to build wonders." I poured my life into that promise. I built wonders, all right. I also missed anniversaries. I worked through birthdays. The day Sarah passed, I was at the Cape, overseeing the launch of our first satellite. A part of me never forgave myself for that. David was there for me then. A brother. But 5 years ago, his health failing. He sold his majority share to a faceless holding company. He called it securing the legacy. That legacy now wore a $1,000 suit and called me fat. Thorne thinks our flagship project, the Odyssey Deep Space Probe, is his golden ticket. It's the company's crown jewel, set to launch in 3 months. He sees the projected profits, the government contracts, the magazine covers. What he doesn't see are the thousands of lines of stabilization code I wrote myself. He doesn't know about the elegant, almost invisible flaw I embedded deep within the primary guidance system. It wasn't malicious. It was a fail-safe, a final resort designed in the early days when we feared a hostile takeover. A sequence of commands, transmitted on a specific frequency, that could cascade the system into a controlled but irreversible failure. David and I called it the Scylla Protocol, a ghost in the machine designed to let the builders scuttle their own ship if pirates ever seized the helm. After David left, I was the only one left who knew the sequence. I pulled an old, leather-bound notebook from a locked drawer, my original design logs. Flipping to a dog-eared page, my finger traced the complex Scylla activation algorithm. Thorne had taken my past and my present. He had no idea I was about to take his future. He wanted to trim the fat. I was about to show him what happens when you cut out the heart. The first step wasn't a grand, cinematic hack. It was quiet, meticulous work. Revenge is an engineering problem, and I am, above all else, an engineer. The Scylla protocol wasn't a simple kill switch. It was a poison pill that needed to be crafted, coded, and delivered with surgical precision. The activation sequence was a complex data packet that had to be disguised as a routine telemetry update. It needed a digital handshake, a key to unlock the system before it would even listen. That key was dynamic, generated by the probe's internal chronometer and broadcast in a low-power diagnostic stream. I had designed the lock, but Thorne's team had changed the combination when they'd updated the software 2 months ago. I needed the new key. I picked up the phone and dialed the one number at Meridian I still had memorized. Elena answered on the second ring, her voice hushed. "Arthur, are you okay?" "I'm fine, Elena," I said, my tone carefully neutral. "Listen, I need a favor. It's for a consulting gig, a non-compete review. I need to cross-reference some old data." It was a weak lie, but the only one I had. "Could you pull the latest pre-flight diagnostic stream from Odyssey? Specifically, the timestamp authentication data from the guidance controller. It should be a simple string." There was a long pause on the other end. I could hear the hum of the servers, the lifeblood of the company I'd built. I could picture her at her terminal, wrestling with her loyalty to me and her duty to her job. "Arthur, I can't," she finally said, her voice strained. "Thorne has everything locked down. New security protocols. My access is compartmentalized now. I can't pull raw data streams like that anymore." My heart sank, a wall I hadn't anticipated. Thorne, in his blind paranoia, had inadvertently strengthened his own defenses. "He's running this place like a fortress," she continued, a spark of anger in her voice. "He gave a press conference this morning, pushed the launch schedule up by 2 weeks, said the team was fully optimized now." 2 weeks. The timeline had just been slashed in half. The knot in my stomach tightened. "But," Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper, "I can't pull the live stream. But the final systems diagnostic is scheduled for tomorrow at 0800. It's a full-power test. For 5 minutes, the entire system will be unfirewalled on the internal network, broadcasting to the test pad receivers. If someone were physically near the pad with the right equipment—" She didn't need to finish. The test pad. It was on the far side of the Meridian campus, near the old wind tunnel. Isolated. Vulnerable. "Thank you, Elena," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was gratitude, laced with the bitter taste of using her trust as a weapon. "Be careful, Arthur," she whispered and hung up. I looked at the schematic of the campus I still had pinned to my wall. The test pad. Thorne wouldn't have security focused on a routine diagnostic. He'd be too busy preparing his victory speech. I began pulling equipment from old dusty boxes, a directional antenna, a signal amplifier, a portable spectrum analyzer, gear from the old days, the garage days. It was all obsolete, but it would work. He'd fired the ghost from the machine, but the ghost was about to pay a visit to the launch pad. Thorne had taken my legacy, my office, my life's work. Tomorrow morning at 0800, I was going to take the key. The pre-dawn air was cold, smelling of damp earth and jet fuel. I was parked on a forgotten service road overlooking Test Pad 3, hidden by a line of overgrown pine trees. My old laptop hummed, connected by a mess of cables to the directional antenna on my car roof. It was crude, but I knew the frequency. I knew its signature. I was listening for a heartbeat I had designed 3 decades ago. At 7:59, the ambient radio noise shifted. A new carrier wave, clean and powerful, cut through the static. The test had begun. My fingers flew across the keyboard, running a capture script I'd written through the sleepless night. For 4 minutes and 50 seconds, I was just an engineer again, lost in the pure cascade of data, hunting for one specific sequence. And then, there it was. A 256-character string of alphanumeric code, nested inside a diagnostic packet. The dynamic key. The digital soul of the Odyssey. I copied the string, saved it to 3 separate encrypted drives, and killed the program. I had it. As I began to pack my gear, the crunch of gravel made me freeze. A black town car had pulled up 50 yards away. The back door opened and Marcus Thorne stepped out, followed by a photographer, a pre-launch PR shoot. He was preening for the cameras, pointing at the probe on the pad, my probe, as if he'd forged it himself from raw metal. He started walking the perimeter, his path taking him right past my car. I ducked, but it was too late. He saw me. "You there," he called out, his voice laced with annoyance. "This is a restricted area. Who are you?" I stood up slowly, pulling an old Meridian maintenance cap from my passenger seat and putting it on. "Just running a final EMI check, sir," I said, my voice intentionally gravelly. "Checking for signal interference." Thorne eyed my obsolete equipment with a sneer of contempt. "Right, well, finish up. I don't want your junk cluttering up my shot." He didn't recognize me. In his world, I was just another faceless cog. An old man with old gear. Redundant. "Yes, sir," I said, turning my back to him to pack the last of my cables. I got in my car, started the engine, and drove away without a second glance. In my pocket, a thumb drive felt warm against my leg. It held the key to his glorious future. He stood there, captain of a ship he thought was unsinkable, while the man who'd laid its keel drove past with the demolition codes. He hadn't just failed to recognize me. He'd failed to recognize his own executioner. Back in the quiet sanctuary of my workshop, the 256-character key glowed on my monitor, a string of gibberish that held the power of life and death over $1 billion piece of engineering. Getting the key was one thing. Turning it and firing the weapon was another problem entirely. A direct digital assault on Meridian was impossible. I had designed the network's defenses myself. It was a digital fortress, and Thorne, in his paranoia, had likely doubled the guards and raised the walls. I couldn't go through the gates. I needed a Trojan horse. My eyes scanned the shelves of my workshop, past oscilloscopes and multimeters, and landed on a small gray box. A Tech 950 diagnostic interface. It was a standard-issue tool, a digital wrench that every senior engineer at Meridian used to interface directly with hardware for final pre-flight checks. They were ubiquitous, trusted, and completely overlooked. They were the perfect delivery system. The plan formed in my mind, a schematic of betrayal. I would modify the firmware of this device. To any diagnostic scan, it would appear perfectly normal. It would even perform its primary function flawlessly. But I would add a hidden subroutine, a venomous payload. When connected to the Odyssey's launch console, on the final day, during the last systems check, my code would wait for a specific trigger, the launch sequence initiated, command from mission control. Upon receiving that signal, it would inject the Scylla activation packet, disguised as a final gyro stabilization update, directly into the probe's primary guidance computer. The system would accept the data without question. It would be a fatal digital aneurysm delivered by the hand of one of Meridian's most trusted engineers. That engineer would be Elena. The thought soured in my stomach. She was the lead for final systems integration. It was her job to be on the launch gantry, running the last checks. She would be the one to physically connect the device. She would be my unwitting accomplice. It was a cruel necessity. Thorne had compartmentalized her access, but he couldn't compartmentalize her duties. Her diligence, the very quality I had mentored in her, would be the mechanism of my revenge. I worked for 2 straight days, fueled by black coffee and a cold, simmering rage. I disassembled the TEK 950, mapping its circuits, and began to write the code. It had to be perfect. A ghost in the firmware, invisible, efficient, and lethal. By Wednesday night, it was done. The device sat on my bench, indistinguishable from any other, yet it was now a bomb, waiting for a timer to start. The final piece of the puzzle was the swap. How to get my weaponized tool into her hands. I couldn't just give it to her. Then I remembered a system I had implemented a decade ago to ensure NASA certification, the weekly equipment calibration cycle. Every Thursday evening, all field-certified diagnostic tools were collected from the engineering labs, sent to the metrology department for recalibration, and returned by Monday morning. The collection was done via a rolling, lockable cart left in the main engineering bullpen. My old employee badge wouldn't get me into a secure lab, but it might still open the main building after hours. It was a long shot. They should have deactivated it the day I was fired. But Thorne's focus was on high-level data security, not the prosaic details of physical access for a fired redundant engineer. He wouldn't think I'd have the nerve to walk back in. Thursday night, I parked in the far corner of the Meridian campus lot. The glass tower I had helped design loomed against the night sky, a monument to a life that was no longer mine. I walked to a side entrance, the one used by the night cleaning crews. I held my breath and swiped the badge. The light flashed green. The lock clicked open. A wave of adrenaline and sorrow washed over me. I was a ghost, walking through my own mausoleum. The bullpen was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of server racks in the distance. The silence was unnerving. This place, once buzzing with the energy of creation, felt like a tomb. I found the calibration cart near Elena's workstation. Inside, nestled among a dozen other devices, was her Tech 950. I recognized it instantly. A small, faded sticker of the Andromeda Galaxy was peeling at one corner. She'd put it there as an intern, dreaming of the stars. My hands were steady. I pulled on a pair of latex gloves. I carefully removed the calibration tag from her device, a simple slip of paper with her name and department. I affixed it to my identical, weaponized tool. Then I made the switch. Her clean, innocent device went into my bag. Mine went into the cart. The entire exchange took less than 30 seconds. As I walked back out into the cold night air, the building looming at my back, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the immense, crushing weight of a finished equation. The system he trusted, the protocols I created, the engineer I mentored, they were all now cogs in my machine. Thorne was busy planning his victory parade, completely unaware that I had just smuggled the saboteur past his guards and placed the charge directly against the hull of his flagship. The ship was still afloat, but I had just armed the scuttling charge, and the whole world would be watching when it blew. The 2 weeks leading up to the launch were a blur of public relations noise. Thorne was on every news channel, a talking head selling a future he hadn't built. I watched it all from the quiet dark of my workshop, a ghost observing a feast he'd already poisoned. The news reports confirmed the recalibrated diagnostic tools were returned to the engineering team on schedule. The bomb was in place. Launch day arrived with a perfect cloudless sky over the Cape. I didn't go. My presence was in the code, not the crowd. I sat in my workshop, the same room where the Odyssey's first thruster was born, and opened the official NASA livestream on my monitor. The screen was split into 3 feeds: the rocket gleaming on the pad, the tense, focused faces in mission control, and the VIP viewing gallery where Marcus Thorne stood front and center, radiating smug triumph. He was wearing a Meridian-branded flight jacket, a costume for a role he was only playing. The countdown was a familiar liturgy. 10, 9. The final systems poll flashed GO across the screen. I saw Elena, a small figure on the gantry feed, give a final thumbs up before retreating to the blockhouse. She had done her job perfectly. She had connected my Trojan horse. 8, 7. I wasn't watching the rocket. I was watching Thorne's face etched with avarice and ambition. He was already composing the speech he'd give to the board, already counting the bonus that would come with this success. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. A symphony of controlled fire and thunder filled my speakers. The rocket clawed its way into the sky, a brilliant spear aimed at the heavens. It was a beautiful, flawless ascent. Stage separation was clean. The fairing jettisoned on schedule. The livestream announcer's voice was electric with excitement. "And we have confirmation," he declared. "The Odyssey probe is on its own, beginning its long journey to the stars." On the screen, Thorne clapped a colleague on the back, his smile wide enough to swallow the world. For a sickening moment, a sliver of doubt pierced my resolve. What if I'd made a mistake? What if some last-minute patch had rendered my code inert? The probe's telemetry streamed in. A river of green, nominal data. Everything was perfect. And then, it wasn't. It started subtly. A single data point in the attitude control feed flickered from green to yellow. An engineer in mission control pointed at her screen, her expression confused. The flight director leaned over her shoulder. Thorne, in the VIP box, hadn't noticed yet. He was too busy shaking hands. But I saw it. The first tremor. The beginning of the end. The Sala protocol was awake. It wasn't a bomb. It was a cancer. My code began issuing microcorrections to the stabilization gyros, phantom commands that contradicted the probe's actual orientation. The primary system fought back, issuing its own corrections. They began to fight each other, a war in a space of nanoseconds. On screen, more data points turned yellow, then red. Alarms began to chime softly in the background of the mission control audio feed. "We have a stabilization anomaly." The flight director's voice was suddenly tight, stripped of its earlier joy. "Attitude control it's oscillating." Thorne's smile finally vanished. He turned his attention to the large screen in the gallery displaying the telemetry. He didn't understand what he was seeing, but he understood the red tide washing over the data stream. The oscillations became a death spiral. The probe, caught in a feedback loop of its own making, began to tear itself apart. The torque stress was unimaginable. On my screen, a new line of text appeared, stark and final. "Signal lost." The announcer fell silent. The river of data stopped. There was only static. $1 billion, 3 decades of work, my life's masterpiece. All of it was now a cloud of silent, glittering debris. A new constellation of failure. In the VIP box, Thorne's face was a mask of disbelief, which quickly curdled into pure, unadulterated fury. He slammed his fist on the console in front of him and stormed out of view, barking into his phone. I closed the live stream. The silence in my workshop was absolute. I felt no joy, no triumph, only a vast, cold emptiness. The work was done. An hour later, a news alert popped up on my phone. The headline read, "Meridian Dynamics CEO alleges sabotage in Odyssey probe disaster." I clicked the link. The article was brief, quoting an anonymous internal source. It said the catastrophic failure was traced to a corrupted data packet, uploaded during the final gantry check. The upload came from a diagnostic tool assigned to the lead systems integration engineer. A warrant was being issued. Her name was Elena. Thorne, in his blind rage, had found his saboteur. He'd found the easiest person to blame, the most convenient scapegoat. I leaned back in my chair, the screen's glow illuminating the dust motes in the air. The headline burned on the screen, a brand of my own making. Zombie C. Vina. The name was a shard of glass in my throat. I had envisioned many outcomes, but in my meticulous calculations, I had never accounted for the sheer, predictable cruelty of a cornered man. I had been so focused on the target that I hadn't seen the innocent bystander standing right behind him. Thorne wasn't just sinking. He was grabbing the nearest person to use as a life raft, and I had handed her to him. My cold, empty victory now felt like a debt. The satisfaction I had anticipated was replaced by a nauseating wave of guilt. This wasn't justice. It was just a different kind of wreckage. I had built a weapon to punish a pirate, but a member of my own crew was caught in the blast. My signature was on her original hiring papers. My praise was all over her performance reviews. I had made her brilliant. I had made her visible. And now I had made her the perfect scapegoat. I stood up, the chair scraping against the concrete floor. The rage I felt before was a controlled burn. This was a white-hot fury, aimed not just at Thorne, but at myself. He thought he'd found a neat and tidy solution, a public execution to cover his own incompetence. He thought he had won, but he was fighting a ghost, and ghosts have nothing left to lose. I walked to my safe and pulled out the leather-bound notebook containing the original Scylla protocol designs. Next to it, I placed Elena's unmodified TEK 950. Still in my bag, its faded Andromeda sticker a silent accusation. This was my proof. I had designed the system. I knew its secrets. I could prove, without a shadow of a doubt, that the sabotage was an inside job of an entirely different kind, one that required knowledge no one but the ship's original architect possessed. Thorne wanted a saboteur. I would give him one. He just wouldn't like the name on the confession. My revenge was incomplete. Destroying the Odyssey wasn't the final move. Saving its best engineer, saving my true legacy in her, that would be my victory. I picked up the phone. It was time to find a reporter who liked a good story about a ghost coming back to haunt the captain. Have you ever poured your heart into a job and felt completely misunderstood or undervalued by new management? Share your story in the comments below.